Hey Dynamics 365ers, it's Benitez here, and I'm going to be doing a two-part series on Dynamics 365 for web forms. So in part 1, I will be showing you how to achieve button-like functionality where end users in the portal, they can save and close an application and also proceed with submitting their application. So let's get started. Okay, so the scenario that I've put together today is in regards to Westeros recruitment. So for those of you who are Game of Thrones fans, this is for you. So in this portal, basically, is just people applying for positions throughout the Seven Kingdoms of Westeros. And the platform that we're using, of course, is Dynamics 365 and Dynamics Portals. And what I thought I would do is provide a breakdown of basically how everything is linked together in Dynamics 365 portals. This is an ERD diagram, and I'm not sure whether it's appropriate because a view and a form, technically they aren't entity tables, if you get what I mean, in the context of CRM, or maybe they are. But I thought an ERD was the best way to explain the overview of how Dynamics 365 and Dynamics Portals works together. If you haven't already seen my ERD vlog, go check it out. Okay, so what I've tried to explain in this diagram is how everything links together in terms of the application process that you're going to see. So when an end user goes to apply, they go to a list view, which is presented through a web page. So this is what these two components in the diagram represent. So my entity list is linked to an applications entity view in CRM. And then the web page, it is pulling through a web form. So in my Dynamics 365, I have two web forms. One is for a new application and the other is an edit application. And in both of those web forms, I'm utilizing Dynamics Portal's web form steps. And a web form step will basically display a Dynamics Portal entity form that you've configured, and the Dynamics entity form will point to a CRM entity form. Now, this may sound confusing if you're not familiar with Dynamics 365 and Dynamics Portals, which is why I put this diagram, so hopefully you can follow me in this vlog. And I put an asterisk up here because essentially an entity list will point to two web pages. The first one is usually the details view. So when a portal end user is clicking on a record in the entity list, they will go to a web page to be able to view that record. And then the other is web page for create. So if an end user is creating a new record from that entity list, then it's going to be directed to a separate web page that is simply dedicated for creating records. Okay, so in terms of the Dynamics Portals application process that I've put together, the user experience is that in the first step, they indicate their position preference, and the next step is where they will be entering their contact details. So that is linked to a contact record, and then they need to supply some documentation as part of their application that will represent the proof of evidence. All right, so what I'm showing you today is how to achieve save and close like button functionality. And out of the box, when you use web form steps and when you get to the very last step and you click on the submit button, it will automatically display a success message. given that you've met the criteria, and you essentially remain in that last step. And usually, best practice is that the application gets saved and they get redirected back to the list so that they know that their record has been created. And the next bit from there is, okay, so after they save and close their application and maybe they want to make some changes to it later on, and when they're ready, they want to be able to submit their application. So the next thing that I will show you is how to be able to submit how to be able to submit their application through the portal. So what we're going to do is now jump straight into it. So this is the portal that I've configured. It is using the community portal template. So the first thing that you'll see is things like knowledge base articles, and as you scroll down there'll be some images that I've simply loaded onto the portal. And if you didn't already know, the Dynamics portals is also responsive. So when you resize your browser, or if you're looking at a Dynamics portal site on your phone, it will adjust automatically, which is great. It's good to know that Dynamics Portals has carried that on from ADX Studio Portals. Okay, so I'm going to log in as a user and I'll show you the process of applications. So when you click on My Applications, this is where you will be presented with a list. So if I go back to the PowerPoint, if I go back to this diagram that I showed you earlier, at this point, that My Applications is a web page, and it's pointing to a My Applications entity list, and from the CRM, it's servicing the My Applications system view that I set up against the applications entity. And I'll show you the process of creating a new application. So there's a button up here, and when you click on this new button, this is where you will get presented with the first step in the web form. So again, if I just simply go back to my PowerPoint, and in here, this is the first web form step. So you supply the position that you're applying for, and this is linked to my custom entity of program. And then the second step will be supplying contact details, which is the contact entity. And then when we go to the proof of evidence, which is the last step in the application process, that is linked to, again, a different custom entity that I've created. So going back to the portal, this is where the end user will select the program that they want to be enrolled in. So if I click on Kingdom, it's going to show us the kingdoms of Westeros. So I'm going to select the Vale of Arryn, and what I'm going to select next is being a moon door operator, because it could be fun, and also selecting a commencement period. So I'll select the first one of next year. Okay, so once I hit this next button, behind the scenes, what the Dynamics Portals does is it will actually create this application. So the record will exist in CRM, and that's how it works out of the box. So that is something you need to be aware of. Every time you are using a form in Dynamics Portals and you see either the next or the submit button, it is essentially creating the record if it hasn't already been created, and it's not the concept that you think where it's saving the information that you've entered and not creating the record. That's probably something that end users kind of get confused with, which is the purpose of this vlog, to show you how to make it more clear to the end user that they're actually creating that application, basically. Okay, so in step 2, what they're doing is they're simply entering their details. So if I were to type something in here, it will actually go and save back in CRM as well. So when I click next, again, it is simply saving that information that I've entered back into the contact form for my end user in Dynamics 365. And this is the last step, and this is where they need to provide their proof of evidence. So when I click on create, we'll be presented with what we call a modal, and this is where we select what type of compliance or proof of evidence that we're supplying. And you'll notice that attached file is mandatory, so if I click on submit, an error message is going to be displayed. So everything that I've shown you up to date is configured in Dynamics 365 and then surfaced through Dynamics portals. I have not done any coding. This is all configuration, which is pretty cool. I think it's great that I don't need to know code to be able to do any of this at all. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to submit a file and click on submit. And this will now go ahead and create that record, as you can see. And if we click back on this record that has been created, we'll see that the document has been uploaded, and we can also download that document as well. And so this is what it looks like. So this is all, again, like I said, this is all configured in Dynamics 365, and it'll surface through the Dynamics portals. Okay, so this is a bit where it can be confusing, because as I explained earlier, whenever you click on next, previous, or submit, it's actually saving the record and creating it if it doesn't already exist. So when I hit the submit button, what will happen is it will automatically display that this has been submitted and it's been completed successfully. Okay, but there's two issues with this. The first thing is, so it's great that the end user knows that it has been submitted, which is great, but it really hasn't, because all Dynamics Portals has done is that it's saved it. It hasn't actually pushed it out to some queue or some process for someone else to review. This is really just a save method in the Dynamics portal. And the other issue is that they simply see this display message, but ideally, we would want them to be redirected to that list view. And right now, the only way for the end user to go back to that list view is if they click on My Applications. And you don't really want that. You want them to be able to save that application, and upon save of that very last step, come back to this My Applications view, so that you're reducing that one click and you're making that portal and user experience better. Okay, so how do we achieve that automatic redirect to the My Applications list? This is where we add in an additional web form step, as well as change the labeling of the buttons that you saw. So the button labels that you were seeing were things like previous, next, and submit. So what I'm going to show you now is how to change those labels, and then how to also redirect to the My Applications view using web form steps. Okay, so I'm now in Dynamics 365, and as mentioned earlier, I have two web forms. The first one is a new application, and the second one is view application. So if I open up my new application form, this is where all the web form steps live for when someone creates a brand new application. And as we scroll down, we'll see the associated web form steps that are linked to this web form. And what we want to do is we want the very last step to be this one. And what I need to do is when I open this record, which is the third web form step, so this is where they are providing their proof of evidence, I want to make a reference to my very last web form step, and I've called that redirect entity list. Okay, so the difference with this very last step is step 1, 2, and 3 are of type load form. So when the web form step type equals load form, it will load a form that the end user has to complete. And in my last web form step, what I've configured the type to be is a redirect. And when you select the type of redirect, this is where you can essentially reference a web page. And what this My Applications web page represents is a way for the end user to simply view that My Applications entity list. And so that is what that fourth web form step is doing. It is simply type of redirect, and we're pointing it to the My Applications webpage. And in the My Applications webpage, it is simply showing the My Applications list. Okay, so the first thing that we've addressed is the redirect. And what we want to do now is go ahead and update the labels in each of those web form steps. So I'm going to go back to web forms. I'm going to open up my new application web form, and I'm going to start with step 1. So this is the bit where it is linked to the application entity form, so that's my custom entity. And as we scroll down, we want to go down to the form options tab, and we want to go to action button settings. So in step 1, I want to change the next button text. So instead of saying next, I want to make it clear to the end user that it is that the portal is simply saving what they've entered and creating that record. So what I'm entering here now is called save and next. So if I hit save, that will go and update the button in step 1. And we want to do the same in step 2. I'm just going to wait for this form to load. Okay, so same thing, we scroll down to the action button settings area of the web form step, and this time I will have save and previous and save and next, and we're going to repeat that for the third step. So I'll just wait for this to load. And I'll go ahead and update this as well. And then in terms of the submit button, now what I'm going to do is actually enter in save and close. So this is an indication that this is the last step, and so when they click on the save and close button, it will take them back to the My Applications page. Okay, so if we now go back to the portal, what I'm going to do is refresh the portal cache so that I can now show you that the changes have come through. Okay, so I only updated the labels in the new application web form. So what I'll do is I'll create a brand new application, and you'll see that the button has since been updated. So now it's saying save and next, whereas previously it was just saying next. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly go through this process again. This time I'm selecting the lovely Kingdom of Dawn, and I want to, enroll in how to kill the whip, because that's cool. Okay, so selecting commencement date, and when we go to web form step 2, we should also see the change of button labels. So you'll see that it's saying save and previous, save and next. So again, I'll click on save and next from here, and then you'll see that save and close has been updated. So now when I click on create, and if I select something else, well, now when I hit save and close, it will now call that fourth web form step, and it will now redirect us back to the web page of My Applications, where it is now displaying the entity list of My Applications. So it's pretty easy to configure. All you needed to do was create another web form step where the type equals redirect instead of load form, and point it to a web page where the web page will then point to the entity list for it to come back to this view. So then the very last thing that I'm going to show you in this part 1 series is how do I then get this application submitted, because we've now configured the buttons to be a bit more clear to the end user that it is simply saving their application. It is not submitting their application to someone to review. And what we can do with that code is reference a workflow. So what I've done is in My Application entity, in the status reason field, I've created a brand new value of submitted, and I then created a simple workflow where when the workflow is executed, so I've got it as an on-demand, it will simply change the status to submitted, and it will then remove the application from the view, because my unsubmitted applications view in Dynamics 365 is only showing where status reason equals unsubmitted, and then I have another view which I've created called submitted applications where the status reason equals submitted. So if I click on this little drop down guy, I can get to the submitted applications entity list, which is pointing to the submitted applications system view in Dynamics 365. All right, so how exactly do we achieve that? This is where you can associate a workflow to an entity list. So in Dynamics 365, you want to go to Portals and you want to select Entity List. And in the Entity List, this is where you can associate a workflow to achieve that submit application functionality. I will wait for this to load, finish loading. Or maybe I can just jump straight through. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to head down to Options. And in here, in the Options tab, there's this area called Grid Configuration. And we'll see that there's an option here called Item Actions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select Workflow. And it knows that there's one workflow that is linked to the applications entity, which is the entity that has been selected up here. So this is why it is loading. And I will now give this a button label of Submit Application and simply save the record. And if I now click on Clear Cache and go back to Dynamics Portals, refresh my browser, we'll notice that there is now a drop-down light button, and when you click on this, you'll now see that label, Submit Application, where this will now call that workflow. So I'm going to click on Submit Application, and we're seeing that the workflow has been initiated. And if you wanted to change that message as well, go back to your entity list, click on Advanced Settings, and you'll see that the success message is here. So really I could update it to thank you, your application has been submitted. Okay, so I'll show you that change again. So clear my cache, go back to my applications, refresh the browser, and if I select this application and click Submit, we'll see that now that success message has been updated and it's now disappeared. So because I've now selected those two applications and I've triggered that workflow where it's now updating the status reason to submitted, it's dropping off the unsubmitted applications view because of how I've got a filter criteria where I only want to show applications where status reason equals unsubmitted. So now when we click on the submitted applications view in Dynamics Portals, we'll now see that it is displaying those submitted applications, and you'll see that it now has a status of submitted. Okay, so in part 2, which will be my next vlog, what I'll be showing next time is how to simply achieve making this form read-only. Sorry, this application read-only because it is now in a status reason of submitted. So basically, I shouldn't be able to update this because it's been submitted. It should be a read-only application form on the portal. So this is what I'll be showing you next time in part 2 of this vlog. Cool. Until next time, see you. Make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel as well as follow me on my blog and follow me on my Twitter. See you next time. Bye.